La mod zan Romania, musuta Diani. How many of you would like to live a happier, more effective, and healthier life? Could you just raise your hand? Yet how many of you feel overwhelmed by all that you have to do? Maybe you had a few cups of coffee this morning. And for those who were overwhelmed, how many of you have tried to solve this problem by getting more done? For example, by using time management or productivity techniques. So I'm going to let you into a secret. We can accomplish more, but not by doing more, but paradoxically, by practicing not doing. So that's what I'm going to share with you in this TED Talk. So I want to take you back a few years ago. I was traveling on the train from Paris to London, and for the past few months, I've been working very intensely in half a dozen countries, and I was glad to finally be returning home. My days were often 12 hours long, 6 days a week, flying from one continent to another, starting work on the next day. And although I loved my work, it was energy draining, not just physically. As I gazed out of the window, suddenly I became overwhelmed with a deep sadness. I felt really heavy. It was as if all the energy that had been used to mobilize myself over the last few months had suddenly gone. I had a daydream of myself lying in a hospital. The doctors were looking at me with concern. I was unable to move, as if I was paralyzed, unable to speak, not even to feed myself. I had reached my edge. For the next few weeks, I felt myself unable to pretend to be okay. I remember going to a friend, laying down in her arms, and just wanting to cry. It was my body saying, "Stop. You can't go on like this. You need to find another way." Sometimes we need to come to the edge to realize that the old way of doing things no longer works. It was this experience of burnout that was one of the factors that led myself and my co-author, Diana Renner, she's from Craiova, by the way, to write a book about not doing. This experience was far from unique to me. We live in a society that's obsessed with the idea that to be valuable is to be productive. And people humble brag about how busy they are while they drink caffeine to stay awake in the morning and take a pill at night to fall asleep. We live in a world that's been described as liquid modernity by the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman. He says coping with the complexity and the uncertainty in the modern world is challenging, and our workplace is fluid, dynamic, and it's ever-changing. We might feel that despite our best efforts, we are making no progress in our work. So, for example, we accomplish something at work, then we're given another 10 things to do. Or a sense of pressure or urgency to act fast. Imagine you've just got home, you're about to relax, and then you see an email from your manager. You feel, I need to respond, otherwise they'll think I'm not actually competent. Or we find ourselves excessively busy, no time for hobbies, or perhaps meeting friends. I think somebody told me the definition of being an adult is sending each other text messages saying, "We should meet up," and the other replies, "Yes, we should meet up," until one of you dies. One of my colleagues also told me, "Stephen, it's not a hobby if you haven't done it in the last 6 months. It used to be a hobby." So I hope you do have hobbies. And a lack of joy and fulfillment, maybe it's going well on the outside, but inside you feel empty. When I mentioned not doing, the title of this talk, the paradox of not doing, you might have felt that perhaps it's about inaction, sitting on the sofa, eating chips and watching Netflix. One of my friends said, "Stephen, don't tell the audience it's about Netflix and chilling, because that means something completely different if you invite somebody to do that." Or passivity, allowing things to happen, showing no agency, no momentum. Or perhaps you thought it was simply being lazy or irresponsible at worst. This is not what I mean by not doing. Not doing is not inactivity, but it's about taking action that's more effective and sustainable. It's neither push nor pull, but it's working with the context and allowing that to take you forward and making a decision from that considered space. Let me give you 2 examples. I was once in an audience like this, and there was a very inspirational woman standing on the stage and speaking. And suddenly, I noticed the man next to me I noticed a tear coming from his eye, and he was beginning to cry. And for a few moments, I ignored that, but then he was really crying, and I didn't know what to do. So I was very British. I reached into my pocket and took a tissue, and I said, "Would you like a tissue?" And he said to me, "I appreciate your concern. Can you leave me to my own process?" In that moment, I discovered what I was trying to do was trying to move away from my inability to be with him in his suffering, to be with him exactly where he was and trying to comfort him. Well, perhaps this man had not cried in many years, and that's exactly what he needed to do right then. So rather than quickly reacting, maybe I just learned to pause, think about why am I acting and who am I acting for. Not doing is also not supporting a boom and bust cycle. I used to work in an investment bank, and it was common in some areas of that bank for people to work 80 hours plus a week. So they would work so they were exhausted, and then they would go and spend 2 weeks in Bali to recover and repeat the cycle. While it appeared to work in the short term, or the longer term impact was often quite severe. So they had health issues, perhaps developed addictions, depression, and in the case of one intern who was working these extreme hours, he committed suicide. So death by overwork is so common that they even have a phrase for this in Japan. It's known as karoshi. So I'm sure that for some of you, not doing may seem like madness. It does not conform to the mainstream view of what it means to be successful and to struggle to achieve. But then why are we driven to do? Taking action in itself is healthy. Right now, you're not doing nothing. You're breathing, listening, millions of processes happening in your body. The fault is not with doing. The fault is with obsessive doing, acting crazy busy or filled with a joyless urgency. For example, we're told by successful entrepreneurs, even here in Bucharest, like Gary Vee, who spoke recently at Brand Minds, we should not stop hustling. Or many TED talkers give us tips to be more productive. Do everything in 18 minutes. That's a message for their TED. Or get a 20-second advantage. Or wake up at 5 o'clock to change your life. There's biohacking communities that measure every single thing and turn it into data to improve efficiency. Yet the most successful people, whether they're Elon Musk from Tesla or Travis Kalanick from Uber, who are lauded for always being on, find themselves wiping millions of their company's share price by questionable comments or erratic behavior, creating toxic work cultures likely driven by exhaustion, pushing themselves and others too far. In their book, A Bias for Action, Heike Baruch and Samantha Gosho describe a type of manager they call the frenzied. They said 40% of managers are juggling a myriad of tasks. They're running from one meeting to another, focusing on the short-term operational tasks rather than the longer-term strategic ones, answering urgent emails, dealing with crisis. Perhaps you can relate to this, sacrificing the important for the urgent. These managers are energetic, but they're unfocused. They're frenetic, desperate, and hasty. If we're crazy busy, we limit the opportunity for new ideas to emerge. And often it can lead to exhaustion, ineffectiveness, mistakes can arise from this place. In my view, the busy leader is just as dangerous as the incompetent leader. So one of the ways that obsessive doing manifests is this idea of clock as lock. It's the idea of the ticking clock. Right now, I can see a ticking clock in front of me. That it produces this anxiety. There's a woman called Nicole Vosper. She has a blog, and her blog is called Clock is Lock. And she describes how she became obsessed by the clock. And her self-worth was orientated around how much she could achieve. Not resting. She got angry at people who were late, frustrated with anyone who stands in her way. We can become obsessed with time, and some things can't be dictated by time. So things like relationship building, collaboration, innovation, they cannot be rushed. They need to be left to the time that they require. We live in a get-things-done world. We're rewarded for taking action and solving problems. This likely originates from the military, where minutes are made making life and death decisions. We're encouraged just to do it, because action gives us a false reassurance something is being done so we can relax. We're making progress, moving towards a solution. But the complex challenges we face today cannot often be solved by just taking action. That can even be counterproductive, especially if it's rushed action. So why do we do what we do? Part of that is this idea of FOMO, this idea that time, money, opportunities are scarce and that we'll lose out. So many of us go to events, or we ask to be copied on emails, or we attend meetings, just from the fear of missing out, this fear of loss. When I was training as a therapist, my therapist said to me, Stephen, you choose, you lose. There's always a loss in every option. There's an exclusion. But we live in a world that tries to encourage us to do as much as we can. There's this idea of carpe diem. We must seize the day. We must visit the top 100 places in the world, eat in the 50 best restaurants, see the 100 best films. And if we're not doing that, we feel that we're losing out. Roman Karzenek, in his book, Carpe Diem Regained, says that the idea of seizing the day has been taken over by consumer culture. So just do it has become just buy it. Thinking about all this efficiency in time management, rather than being spontaneous, it's become just plan it. The 24/7 entertainment culture has become, rather than doing an experience, just watch it. Just watch it on your television. And the mindfulness culture has said it's so much emphasizing the here and now, rather than just do it, it's become just breathe. So showing us what others are doing on social media, it taps into our status anxiety. We can feel if we're not connected, then we're losing out. But FOMO challenges us to accept our limitations and to make choices. So let me share with you 3 ideas that might help with not doing. The first idea is let the mud settle. It comes from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. He said, do you have the patience to let the mud settle till the water becomes clear all by itself? And part of that is about effectively using pauses. Sometimes when we're sick, we're forced to pause, we're forced to stop. But in the hectic environments we live in and work in, we're overemphasizing motion. The time to pause is often a luxury. Yet pausing is an effective intervention that allows us to think and gives us benefits that we might not otherwise have. In sport, a pause is used to rethink strategy. So think about the sport of basketball. When the coach calls a timeout, he can think to his players, what can he do? And how can they create space to shift the direction of play in response to the emerging dynamics? So it can be very powerful to take that pause to reflect. But often we're in high-pressure situations like this one, for example, speaking to hundreds of people on a TED stage. Do I have time to pause? What if I was not to do my TED Talk? What if you were not to do the role of the audience? I remember going to my therapist and saying to him, I'm so exhausted, I don't have time for a holiday. He said to me, Stephen, could you take a vacation right here, right now? I said, what? Yes. So I'm going to invite you. Could you, if you've got something on your lap, could you put it on the ground? Could you join me in a short 30-second vacation? So I want you to put your feet up, maybe put your hands behind your lap, and just take that pause. Maybe breathe out. That holiday that you were waiting for in December in the new year, can you start it now? So I'm just encouraging you to take that pause. Sometimes we don't need to wait for the future. What happens if, rather than just answering that email on the train, you just paused, you just took that rest here and now? So this is the encouragement. Not doing isn't a future activity. Not doing is something that we can enjoy right here, right now. Second idea, I bet one of you want to stay there. You can stay there if you wish, right? So I'm not asking you to move on. The second idea is to transform what you do by taking a different attitude to it. It's not about taking the road less traveled. It's about traveling your road more meaningfully. So I was working with a group of executives. We practiced this thing called street wisdom, which was a social movement created by David Pearl. And the idea was, rather than going on a pilgrimage, maybe the Camino de Santiago from France to Spain, you could find wisdom in your everyday surroundings, in your everyday where you are in Bucharest, right here, right now, by having the eyes to see. So how it worked was the executives would have a question in their mind, something they were thinking about. So these executives wanted to think about how could they help improve their magazine, their luxury magazine. So first, they would recollect their favorite street in the world and why it was their favorite street. And then I sent them on short 10-minute mini walks to open up their senses. So the first walk, I would say, notice what you're attracted to, what draws you. On the second walk, I would say, go so slowly and walk slower still. So slow that even the hairs on your head have time to grow. And they notice things that they never noticed before. The third walk said, see the beauty in everything. And then I sent them on a longer walk, maybe it was 40 minutes, and they spoke to strangers, they saw billboard signs, and they got inspiration that helped them solve their challenges. If we're open, we can find our answers everywhere. The last idea is to practice letting go of our plans. Instead, hold our plans lightly and flow with what is happening rather than what we wish was happening. So I'll give you an example of this. Is I decided to actually do the Camino de Santiago, to walk on this pilgrimage. But I didn't have a month to walk. I only had 2 weeks. So I decided to walk from Leon in Spain, the few hundred kilometers to Santiago. And the question I had in my mind that I wanted to learn about was, how do I learn to let go? I'd been used to living a very busy life, used to comfort of 5-star hotels. How could I learn to come back to simplicity, and how can I learn to let go? So I bought a rucksack, I bought everything I needed, even a washing line. I was so prepared. And I remember going and taking the plane. And for the first time in my life, having taken 100 flights or thousands of flights, my luggage didn't arrive. And I arrived in the Spanish airport, and they were questioning me, interrogating me. Who is this man who comes without any luggage? So I was there without anything. I had no power in my phone, so I decided to charge it in the Corte d'Inglés department store. I think security were looking at me like some crazy man. And I called Iberia. They said, we don't know where your luggage is. So I said, rather than waste my days, let me just buy a T-shirt and shorts. And I walked without any rucksack or sleeping bag. And every time I stopped in a hostel, they said, you don't have a sleeping bag? No, take a liner. You don't have a towel? No, take this. And I met many fascinating people along the journey. On my 6th day, I was walking outside the hostel, and suddenly I felt a sharp pain in my foot. And I felt a piece of glass go into my heel. And it went straight. It didn't go at an angle. And I was in pain. I thought, what should I do now? I could walk on stoically, or I could get it seen to. So I decided to get it seen to. I managed to get to the local hospital, and they said, the only thing we can do is remove the glass, but it will be the end of your Camino. So I removed the glass, and what happened was one other traveler stayed with me and looked after me for 2 days. And that person had been through very traumatic instances in their life, and they ended up writing their autobiography, helping them with their life story. So when I decided to return to London, I got a text message from Iberia saying, Stephen, your luggage is in Santiago. So I took the train to Santiago, and I was on crutches, and I walked to the cathedral, and I knelt down, and I cried. And I cried because actually I was grateful. I'd got what I came for. I'd learned to let go of my plans. Martin Buber, the German philosopher, said, every journey has a secret destination of which the traveler is unaware. So sometimes it might not be what we intended to be our destination, but it's how we travel that, how we get there. So not doing is about thinking of a wider definition of action. It's learning to pause. It's learning to actually think about how we can travel our road more meaningfully. And it's learning to let go and work with what is. Thank you.